Okay, I'm checking to see if the crank is bent or warped, and just looking at the needle there as I move the crank around, roll it around. We probably don't have even 2 thousandths run out in that crank, so that's plenty good. We'll grind it right there where it is. We won't have to do any straightening on it. Since, let's see, what was this journal right here? What would that be? It's actually number 4 on a Pontiac. Had a spun journal, and a lot of times when they do that, they get hot, and then the extra pounding of the bearing on there, they will be warped. So I would not have been surprised at all if this crank had been warped, but it runs very, very true. Won't have to do anything to it at all. I just got done grinding the 454 Chevrolet crankshaft in here. 454 has a 4-inch stroke length. Now I'm going to do the 350 Pontiac, which has a 3 3/4 inch stroke length. So I need to adjust these chucks from 4-inch diameter down to 3 3/4. You do it through half the diameter, the radius. So I need to move from 2-inch radius down to 1 7/8, which is 125 thousandths. So I've set my gauge here. Full scale, 120 thousandths. Here's +5 here, 125 thousandths. And I'm going to back off that stroke length till this gauge is on 0. Okay, there I am, 0 0. Move over to the other side, do the same thing. Okay, I'm 0 0 on that side. And with that, I should be able to mount my crankshaft. I don't know if any of you people have noticed this, but over the years, cast iron has gotten heavier, and I found myself having to use the hoist here for these smaller cranks that I used to just lift in by hand. Crank measures 25 inches long. I should slide this one tailstock in just a little bit. Okay, we need to index the crank into the machine, and we use this V block here. Crank is loose in the chucks, and just rotate it just a little bit so it's in the V. Lock the chucks down. May have to change the balance just a little bit here on the counterweights as we shorten the stroke up here.
So what happens if it's not balanced?
Makes the crank kind of flop as it comes around. It doesn't run steady. It's first, the belt that drives this would first be under tension, and then as it goes over center, it would slightly jump forward if there's any slack in the belt at all. So it's just good to have it in balance, so it's not trying to go the opposite direction all the time. Okay, so this journal here is our worst one. We want to start on it, figure out what it'll clean up at before we move on to the next. I'm actually going to set this up over on the left side where the journal is not torn up at all. Let's see how close we are. I'll set that gauge there on 0. and rotate this around by hand, and actually that is really close. I'm surprised with all the changes we've made and just initially putting the crank in the machine that it's that close.
So that close is
3/1000ths.
3/1000ths.
Yeah, showing about 3/1000ths. So now I need to zero in the index of the crank. So I'll start here, D position on the machine, come back up to the B position. You can see it's 3/1000ths difference there.
I don't know if they can see the. I don't know if it's glaring.
Okay. So now I'm going to split the difference set with the fine adjustment.
And can you explain a little better what you mean by index?
No. The center line of this rod journal needs to be running exactly on the center line of the axis of the machine here. And that's, you know, it's easy to grind the mains because they're on the center line, but the rod journals are offset by half the stroke length. So that's why we've offset the crank by half that stroke length, so that this rod journal is now in line with the center line of the machine itself here. It looks a little odd with the crank going around like that when you're grinding, but the center line of that rod will be running true to the machine axis, so we can grind it true to exactly the correct stroke length. And so one of the things we have to do is adjust the index of it, and also sometimes you have to make fine adjustments on the stroke length. It'd be nice to grind this crank exactly by the book, but we're working with a crank that may not have been perfect when it was brand new, and it has been ground before, so we don't know what the last guy did, but we're going to try to bring it as close as we can to what the factory says it should be.
Gotta work with what we got.
We have to work with what we've got, make the best out of what you've got. And in doing that, I'm going to adjust this just a little bit more on the index till I can get that as close as I can. Okay, so now when I'm checking those 2 points, they both check the same. Let's turn this on over here. But now as I roll the crank all the way around, I have a little bit of variation there, about 2/1000ths, and that's the difference in stroke length from what the crank is to what the book says it's supposed to be. Just for fun, I'm going to go through and check the other journals before I start grinding and make sure everything is close enough that I can make it grind at the next undersize without having to fudge a little bit on the stroke length. Okay, this journal here, we are off maybe not quite 3/1000ths on the index. I can correct that here real easy. But we are off roughly 6/1000ths on stroke length. So I may want to fudge this just a little bit so that I can make all of the journals clean up and all be exactly the same stroke length, even though they may be off from what the factory calls for, but at least they will all be equal.
But when you're talking about index, each rod throw is...
Each one should be exactly 90 degrees to the next.
Correct.
And cranks are never perfect. They will all have slight variations in them, and when we're grinding one, we go through, try to figure out the average of what might be there, and try and make them as close as we can. Okay, this crank, when I checked the index, pretty close. I would have to fudge this about a thousandth and a half there. But now on my stroke length, about 7 thousandths different from what we had set up on these first two journals here. So I may want to split the difference on that, see if I can't make this crank clean up without having to go either farther undersize on the bearings, or without having to make adjustments from journal to journal
Make them all different.
and have everything different stroke length. When I get done, it may not be exactly by the book on stroke length, but they will all be equal. And in our opinion, being equal is better than whether or not you're within 2 or 3 thousandths of the factory spec.
Well, we've already changed factory spec when we reconditioned our connecting rods. Well, not stroke, but you know, as far as our actual
Piston height.
Yeah, piston height
has
in the
changed.
bore. We've changed that when we decked the block, and we've changed that when we reconditioned the rods.
Okay, I'm going to shorten the stroke by 3.5 thousandths. Now, changing that stroke length by 3.5 thousandths, or actually stroke length by 7, half that, 3.5 thousandths made this run absolutely true. Let's go back to that prior journal we were on and see what it did to that one. Okay, with no other adjustment and that slight change we made coming back to this journal, it's very close too. But now we're a mile off on this one. And there we are, 9 thousandths on stroke length. So I think we better split the difference on that. Okay, after a considerable amount of time, wasted way too much time on this crank, we have found the last guy that ground this, the stroke lengths are just all over the place. None of them are even close to where they're supposed to be. So we've kind of gone through and tried to take an average here, and we've determined that if we increase the stroke length of this crankshaft 8 thousandths from what factory called for, we can come the closest to cleaning up all of the rod journals at 40 under. And in our opinion, I think this will make the best possible crank out of it, because even though we're having to go to 40 under, it will have exactly the same stroke length on all 8 cylinders. No, it looks fine.
Before starting any grinding, we went ahead and dressed the grinding wheel. And with the adjustments made, we're getting set up to start grinding on the rod journal that spun a bearing. Dad is setting the Arnold in-process measurement gauge at 20 thousandths so that he will have a good feel for how much material he has left to remove as he begins grinding. The wheel you see on the right side of the machine is used to control the feed of the grinding wheel towards or away from the crankshaft. The wheel on the left side of the machine is used to traverse the crankshaft laterally relative to the grinding wheel in order to position the stone correctly on the journal for grinding. The two knobs shown here control the pressure on the steady rest, which helps support the crankshaft and keep it in position, as opposed to allowing the force of the grinding to push the crankshaft away from the wheel. While it doesn't look like he's turning them, he is actually making minute adjustments as material is removed from the journal to keep just the right amount of pressure on the crankshaft.
I don't know if you can see in your video there flat spot on that crank that's almost cleaned up. That right there is about another 10 thousandths off of it. Yeah, that's just a little bit better than 10, and you can see the little jump in our needle there where there's still a low spot it goes past.
So it almost would have done 10.
Almost would have done 10, but not quite. Okay, I'm guessing there we've got 5 or 6 to go. So I'm gonna back the wheel off and we'll get the mic out and measure it to see exactly what we have to go with yet.
Sneak in here.
.2152. Okay, 2.2152. 2.2152 minus 2.2095. 0057 is what I've got left to go.
Technically you have 1,000th tolerance, but you're going 2/10 inside of the
High side of
high
spec.
side of tolerance.
So let's set this for 5 7/10. I'm pretty close to that already. We'll take this down here maybe about 3 thousandths. I'm going to measure one more time just to make sure.
As he begins to approach our final size, he has the option to use this button to feed the grinding stone in 2/10 increments. And when I say tenth, I mean 2/10 of a thousandth of an inch. This provides a little more fine control than is easy to achieve with the wheel.
Oh, I've got 2.2124. 2.2124 minus 2.2095 is 0029. Yeah, it's coming out right where it should be. Gauge, yeah, I can adjust that ever so slightly. But one other thing I'm going to do here is chamfer my oil holes before I go any farther.
At this point, he's traversing the crankshaft over in order to begin grinding the other half of this rod journal to size.
I'm going to sweep over the right-hand side of the journal and finish it. There we have it. We double check our size. .209. Six. 2.2095. I'm not going to go back to try to get that last tenth because we are well within our spec, and if I try to get that last 10,000ths of an inch, I will screw something up. You need to stop while you're ahead. Let me check the other side, see if we have any taper. Okay, 2.209. 6. Yeah. Yeah, we're straight, no taper. Everything looking good, so we'll continue on. See if we can make the other journals look the same.
Clicks 90 degrees.
Let's see how we're looking on the indicator here. Okay, our index is quite a few thousandths off here. I'm going to compensate for that. Oh, went a little too far. That gets it pretty close on the index. Stroke length on this one is about 6 thousandths different, but by the time we get done, it'll be exactly the same as the first journal we ground. Okay, I'm not quite in the center with my steady rest. Move over just a little bit. There we go. According to the wheel on the machine, I should be within about 5. We put the Arnold gauge on, and it's telling me 5.5 or so. To bring it within 3. I'm going to go back, sweep over, catch the other side of the journal. I don't know if you noticed how orange the sparks are coming off this. That's because this is a cast iron crankshaft. If this was a steel crankshaft, those sparks would be bright yellow.
So I didn't take too much video of the last 2 rod journals, but it's pretty much the same process, everything that you saw in the first tube here.
Tell you how the rod journals came out. I think the rod journals came out super fine. We've got them all exactly the same stroke length. They all came out on the spec that we wanted. Yes, the crank's 40 under. We wish it wasn't 40 under, but you work with what you've got, and I am not at all concerned that what this will perform for the life of the engine.